Hi, my name is Alex Williams, founder of the New Stack, and you are listening to the New Stack Analyst podcast. Each week, we look at application development and management at scale. I'd like to thank our sponsor today, the Intel Datacenter Group, a leader in defining the open data center, cloud computing, and world of connected systems infrastructure. Its portfolio supports multiple processor families to offer options for workloads that reflect today's diverse user needs. That's the Intel Datacenter Group. You can find them at intel.com. Now let's get to the show. I'm here today with our friends from Intel. We wanted to do this Bento lunch to talk a little bit about how OpenStack is working in the enterprise, and we said thrive, and I think that it is starting to get closer to that point where we really do believe that OpenStack will be around. It's having some very lasting influences, and I think that's what we'll hear today when we talk with Ruchi and Allyson. The New Stack is a technology blog, and we focus on application development and management at scale. We really believe that there's a need to analyze and explain these new technologies that are becoming such an important part of the application developers' work and the people who manage applications. Why don't we just get started? And can each of you guys explain who you are, and then we'll start the discussion.
Sure. Hi, I am Ruchi Bhargava. I work at Intel in the data center and cloud software engineering part of the business in the open source technology center for Intel. And I'm located in Hillsboro, Oregon.
Hi, I'm Allyson Klein. Thanks for being here today and sharing your lunch with us. I run initiative and leadership marketing within the data center group at Intel.
Well, terrific. So we had a conversation beforehand, and we were talking about your experiences with OpenStack and how you worked at Intel on it. Can you tell us about the work that you did on OpenStack at Intel?
Sure thing. So just for the background, even though I'm in the part of Intel which does upstream OpenStack development right now, I started working with OpenStack in 2012 in Intel IT when we started deploying an OpenStack-based private cloud. We used to have a private cloud which was based on virtualization technology with our homegrown orchestration layer, and based on our needs of providing self-service, massively scalable infrastructure, we made the decision to choose OpenStack at that time and pivot on our engineering, like systems integration resources, working on OpenStack.
So I'm curious, what was it that drove that decision? What were you seeing internally that made it something you felt you needed to do?
So I actually joined after the decision was made, but I do know what it was. It was essentially, we had, our previous version of our private cloud was based on a proprietary solution. Any changes which we needed took forever to implement. We were versions behind, and it was, it was a larger organization which was operating it, less agile in terms of making changes, our ability to make changes. So we had a different part of our organization which was focused on our fairly large design infrastructure. As you know, Intel has a large group of design engineers. We run a fairly large, it's not called a cloud, but a large grid of physical servers. And these were people who were very, very proficient in automation. And they looked around what was available in the market. At that time, there was, CloudStack, OpenStack, Eucalyptus, and at that time we chose OpenStack, and as you think, looking at around, probably was the right decision, right? So, because that's one of the ones which is still prevalent.
So what did you learn as going through that process about OpenStack itself at the time? What were some of the learnings?
So, while a lot of us who are in the community try to bash OpenStack a lot, one of the things which is really, really good, it is very easy to put together a very quick implementation for your developers. which people can consume in a very efficient manner. When we put together our first pilot version of infrastructure as a service based on OpenStack, people, could consume it as soon as we put it out. And for us, the problem was on capacity management and the tools which were not present with the OpenStack infrastructure. And the other part of it was we also had an existing brownfield infrastructure. We had our 13,000 to 15,000 VMs existing. How do we integrate those VMs with what we were putting out on OpenStack? So that was, our challenge there.
Interesting. Just a quick question of the audience. How many people here are developers?
You have to ask what kind of developers.
Yeah, what kind of developers are you? Anybody want to share what kind of developer they are, what they're doing? How about operations? How many people are here on operations? How many people would consider themselves DevOps? Okay, all right. It's good to get a kind of gauge in the audience and who we have here. What year was that you started working on OpenStack at Intel?
2012.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you started it in 2012, what version were you working on then? What were you?
We started SX.
SX, okay.
Was, yeah.
Okay. And have you been upgrading since?
We skipped Folsom.
Okay.
We went, one implementation had Grizzly, then we went to Havana, and the current implementation in Intel IT is using Juno.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
but again, there were multiple implementations, some internal facing, some external facing. We had the external facing implementations were easier to work. One would wonder why, but because it didn't have to integrate a lot with the enterprise apps. The internal facing application, the deployment of OpenStack-based cloud was where the biggest challenges were. We had to integrate with existing authentication solutions. So LDAP authentication was, it took us time. It was not that it was difficult, but it took us time to integrate with the existing solutions. Then we have service management solutions like any other enterprise. So we had to integrate with that. And those were the things which took us forever to integrate and deploy solutions. And something which I actually think is a great opportunity for the community, because every enterprise will have only a couple of those options available. There is ServiceNow, Remedy, I don't know how many others, but for service management tools. And for authentication, Keystone works great now with the LDAP authentication capability. But if the framework is established as a reference for a lot of, for majority of the enterprises, I think this would make it much more simpler.
So since 2012, what are some of the major changes that you've seen in OpenStack?
Okay, so of course, when we first started our deployment, we were very naive to say and made this big declaration in Intel IT that we were going to have a hybrid cloud implemented. And in order to do that, you needed to have federated identity. And we thought maybe we could just put it together, we'll contribute upstream. It was not very simple. So we scoped it by having multiple non-federated implementations. But now that is something which is available. We heard this morning in Jonathan's keynote that federated identity has been available since Kilo. So that is one big advancement, according to me. And then the community has been working on things which are essential for an OpenStack implementation in the enterprise. And they're basically around 4 pillars. One is around availability, so high availability for the services, OpenStack services and APIs, high availability for the tenants. And then manageability and maintainability. So when you want to upgrade from one version to the other, how do you do rolling upgrades without tenant downtime? So that's another area which the community has been working on. And deployability, how easy is it to do a push-button deployment? And I think, I don't know if any of you have been in the previous OpenStack summits. We always ran this ruler of the stack. Of course, SUSE always won it, but this year we are not doing it because I think we've got better ideas on how to push that quick deployment options in the community.
So Allyson, what were some of your observations about what you started to see change in the, in the community between 2012 and 2015 when you started talking to partners about what you guys were doing?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've noticed over the last couple of OpenStack summits and just in terms of the conversations is that we've shifted from talking about just technology innovation to how to drive business from OpenStack. I don't know if you saw the, maybe it's because of my focus, the report recently that $1.2 billion is expected in the next year in OpenStack deployments around the world. A few years ago, I think we were, not thinking in terms of $1 billion plus business growing to multi-billion-dollar business in 2017. And I think that the scope of the conversation has shifted a little bit. I'm interested to see how that affects the core developers at the OpenStack Summit. I saw some tweets earlier today that they thought that too much business talk, not enough core developer talk in some of the keynotes, but I think that that's going to be something to see how the evolution of this community embraces the fact that OpenStack is becoming a big business opportunity.
And a lot has changed internally inside organizations too, hasn't it? I mean, and you still see a lot of differences in terms of how companies are deploying OpenStack, don't you?
Yeah, and and it's driven by the use cases, Alex, because one of the things which I've seen at Intel and also in the community as I work in my OpenStack engineering role is when we started working a couple of years ago, most of the people were either comparing it OpenStack as an alternative to Amazon and Google.
Right.
And those were the use cases for cloud native kind of apps. People would, or quick, testing of, when they wanted a testing infrastructure, quickly get it, but they never ran it for enterprise production apps.
Mm-hmm.
And the production apps which did run on Amazon were typically microservices, architecture-based cloud native applications. But then when we started this hype, when it touched the enterprises, you do need something which is designed to compete, let's say, with VMware. We are in this, we can easily talk about VMware, right? So over the years, they have built a pretty strong solution which runs for the enterprises. It took us how many years to go from 5 to 10% virtualized infrastructure to 95% infrastructure in a lot of enterprises for traditional applications which were not designed to run for the cloud. And when I mean not designed to run for the cloud is that they were not designed to run for failure. So
right.
That is a big change.
Right.
So now, but that was in 2012. But if I look now, a lot of enterprises are talking about any new app, let's design it for failure. Let's develop those applications which will run in an HA mode.
What is the lower risk factor there? Why are companies feeling that they can take that risk now?
Because they're realizing that with that, the way when you deploy it, one, they're portable. You can switch the underlying infrastructure and move workloads.
It's faster.
It's faster.
And how is it faster?
Because are you taking me to the container discussion?
I'm trying to get somewhere. I think there's a big difference between where we were last year at this time, and I think containers do play a factor in that.
Yeah, so I think it is agility with containers is big. The ability to spin up huge volumes of compute infrastructure in with limited overhead is definitely one of the promises which Docker has. I wouldn't say containers because containers have been around forever, which Docker has made it possible for us to consume. And on the other hand, there have also been innovations like what I'll brag a little bit about Intel Clear Containers, which takes the same container use case, what made Docker very popular, but gives it the security of Intel VT, of the virtualized technology, and be able to use it.
So define the Intel Clear Container, for all of us, and then perhaps we can talk about it in context of OpenStack.
So in the simplest way, if I have to describe Clear Containers, it is the container use case using the security of a VM. That's the very simple and highly optimized VM. And you get the same number of, from the being fast, you can do fast deployments using Clear Containers.
So it's a factor that contributes. It's just another way to deploy through OpenStack. Containers are another option.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. Right. So the real kind of use case for the clear containers would be for security use cases, for example, or what other use cases would there be?
Or portable workloads.
Portable workloads. So what are some of the portable workload use cases that would be interesting for people to to think about when they're actually doing their own OpenStack deployments?
So I think when Allyson, please feel free to pitch in, but when I see portable workloads as any applications when you want to either migrate the underlying infrastructure, you spin up another container infrastructure and then move these, and you have a new instance, right? Or you want to scale to a higher scale, add more containers right away, and the speed and volume which you can get with containers is a little more than what you can get with VMs.
Well, and I think that one of the points of clear containers is also just extracting out the value of the underlying hardware platform to delivery of the entire solution. So what you're giving is exposure to Intel VT, Intel security technologies, et cetera, so that you have a hardware root of trust in the workload security. And I think that that's something that you'll see as a common refrain from Intel, is working with the software ecosystem to ensure that they're taking and extracting all of the value of those underlying platforms across server, storage, network to bring to the equation.
Now let's take a quick break before we get back to the second half of the show. I'd like to thank the Intel Datacenter Group, a leader in defining the open data center, cloud computing, and world of connected systems infrastructure. Its portfolio supports multiple processor families to offer options for workloads that reflect today's diverse user needs. That's Intel Data Center Group. You can find them at intel.com. Now let's get back to the show. Considering that, we can look at clear containers as one example of how OpenStack is becoming more, I don't know, way to put it, maybe more reachable by more types of companies. What are still some of the broad gaps that you're seeing in terms of how companies are deploying OpenStack?
So I think I touched upon that, Alex, a little bit earlier. So if I have to tell three things which if OpenStack focuses on, one is HA for both tenant and the services, rolling upgrades with zero downtime, and quick deployment tools. These three are big gaps which will take all those traditional enterprise apps users, through to migrating to an OpenStack-based infrastructure.
And yeah, I was going to say, I think that the stuff that Ruchi talked about earlier, it mirrors where our innovation and our targets are in terms of pushing upstream the key tenets that she was just talking about. That's where our work is focused with Rackspace around the OpenStack Innovation Center. Have you guys heard about the Rackspace Intel Center that was announced today? Anybody? If you haven't, check out the Intel booth. It's open to the entire community, and it's a great way of testing your upstream code at scale. And then we're also doing some deep collaborations with Mirantis around some of the key features that Ruchi talked about, bringing more resiliency and more enterprise capabilities into the OpenStack platform.
How much of that do you see kind of in the customers that you're talking to? What is the feedback you're getting about these different aspects of what they're trying to do in terms of these rolling upgrades, for instance, and other aspects of what you're discussing, such as the tooling?
Yeah, so when we first started, and in the last year, that has been traditionally the feedback. But as I've been talking in the last couple of months, people are beginning to start finding, all that work which has gone on in these three areas is beginning to bear fruit. And for example, versioned objects is one means of deploying rolling upgrades. And what we have achieved now is some services in OpenStack can do rolling upgrades. So if somebody has a fairly simple implementation of OpenStack, which say does not, which has which is not using Neutron to its fullest, because Neutron is one area where it is not working currently, people will be able to do rolling upgrades. And those kind of enterprises, those, with that simplified use case, can meet that particular requirement. Now, in working with Mirantis, in working with Rackspace, what we've put together is a joint roadmap that within the Mitaka release, or latest by the end release, we should have these gaps plugged. And once we have these plugged, then we start looking at the little next level down of problems. For example, the adjacent storage solutions where you might see performance issues, but those are things which is more of not an OpenStack issue, but more of how do we work with distributed software-defined infrastructure over and up in adjacent competency with OpenStack. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking more just about the customers and the pain points that they have. And one of the pain points that you hear about is, these companies that have been, essentially have had monoliths internally in their enterprise for a long time. They developed virtualized infrastructure, right? They have different, they work with any number of different vendors, right, for storage and networking. How are you seeing these companies piece these things together? And what are the factors that you guys were thinking about? Because those must have been considerations that you had to think about when you were, building out your own OpenStack environment.
Totally. When we did have, as I said, a pretty significant investment in our private cloud, which we had deployed internally. And then we decided to, all our new instances will be on OpenStack with, which was KVM, with software-defined storage, which was different from the SANs which we had implemented. And how do we do workload movement? If this data center goes down, how can we migrate those workloads to the other data center? So live migration across different infrastructures. And what we had at that point have decided, and now it is pretty much a standard across the various vendors' solutions, is to have a single control plane for orchestration across a diverse set of underlying cloud computing platforms. So you could have Amazon, you could have VMware, you could have OpenStack, either implemented on your own or through public cloud provider, and then have a single control plane which is orchestrating across the world.
So is that OpenStack as a controller in some respects? Is there, what is the role of OpenStack as a controller?
So the orchestration is the role there, and then one of the underlying, say, the compute storage network elements may or may not be using OpenStack components. So it's basically a hybrid solution which we are talking about.
So how are the tools catching up, to that, so you can have the automation, automated deployments and such?
So tools like which ones?
Well, the tools, for instance, we talked about the broad gaps, right?
Yeah.
And the tooling needs out there. What are some of the advances we're starting to see in the tooling capabilities?
So, one of the things which there was a picture which Jonathan showed, which he says it keeps changing. Everybody keeps taking picture of that slide, and he's figuring out a way to position that slide. Do you all remember what he was talking? Which had all the different components of OpenStack in terms of maturity and usage. So one tool, those of you who are using OpenStack, what do you guys think of? Raise your hand if you're using Ceilometer. 3, 4. And and a lot of times when discussions happen, people say, oh, Ceilometer, it's got all these problems. But then they had a user survey with operators, and even in today's thing, it was 46%, but I think in the slide it said 43% of the users use Ceilometer. But it's supposed to be not scalable, it's got severe performance issues. So how can they be using it? And what I have, and I've been telling my team, because we've got people working on Ceilometer, is what do we do? Do we scrap? Do we have the community make a decision that we stop using Ceilometer, or we find, or there's an alternative, or it's a set of tools which people use, because let's first put the Ceilometer story to bed. So what we are doing is with Ceilometer, with that cloud for all, the 2,000 node clusters which we are going to put, the Ceilometer PTL has basically taken it upon himself to make sure that we will make improvements and validate in that scaled environment. And if it needs architectural changes, figure that out. So, but the reality is that besides Ceilometer, there will be tons of other tools. And the reality behind that is because in a real enterprise, you have existing tool sets which are ready, which are being used. And you have to integrate those with what we are using in the infrastructure as a service. So that's why the tool set will be evolving.
So the tools and their evolution, and one of the things that we've seen, and I didn't want to start with containers, but I think now is a good time to talk about it. One of the things we're starting to see are these different forces in the market, right? We're seeing established vendors in the market. We're seeing this new community of companies that are emerging out of the container ecosystem, and they're very dynamic. They're building out their services in entirely different ways. I mean, a lot of them are just starting with containers, just to build out. How does Intel see those companies and their role in in how we see environments such as OpenStack evolve?
I think that we go back to the evolutionary approach of adoption. And when you think about adoption at scale, and you think about the tens of thousands of data centers running around the world, everyone's going to have a different starting point. These new companies that are driving container technology are incredibly important. We need to make long-range bets on that technology innovation. But as Ruchi just said, it took 5 to 7 years to drive application support for virtualization. It's going to take a similar investment of effort by the industry to get applications ready for cloud environments and getting everything moving towards native cloud implementations. I think that we have to provide good guidance to customers on where are they in the trajectory of cloud, where's the next logical step as we innovate with partners across that entire continuum. What do you want to add, Ruchi?
Yeah, totally along the same lines. If I had this conversation with Alex Povey from CoreOS, that's one technology which is on the cloud native microservices architecture. Great, a way to deploy solutions. And then, so he had his presentation at the OpenStack Day in the Silicon Valley. He talked about a few myths that enterprises cannot run those are myths according to them in the cloud native environment. But he also at the same point of time said they can, but there is an effort involved for any enterprise to move to a cloud native environment. And it requires significant effort with the different technology companies which are available, which are deploying solutions, are putting forth solutions. And so in my mind, it will take at least 5 to 6 years before which the majority of the enterprise apps will be in a cloud native environment. Till then, they will be traditional, and solutions which are VM based, such as OpenStack, will have a great opportunity, and we have to improve the solutions which are the gaps which are there.
But okay, so we have container technologies which are proving to be very lightweight, and we have the capability to move workloads around. We've talked a lot about the reduced risk factor that comes with just trying new things and being able to embrace failure with containers, which means a greater ability to adopt microservices. And that whole process then means a higher degree of automation. So shouldn't we see a more rapid acceleration, or why would we not? I mean, because it seems like now we just have we're seeing this evolution of these very lightweight systems out there, and in services that would make it possible for us to accelerate a lot faster than we have over the past several years.
So there are two aspects of containers, right? One is if I deploy OpenStack on containers, that's definitely going to happen much faster than anything else. But if I deploy my applications, the enterprise apps on containers, that evolution is going to take a lot of time. because in order for the entire enterprise development ecosystem to move to design for cloud implementation, it is definitely going to take a few years.
So the cloud native discussion then becomes part of this, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And so there's an investment that's being made in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and one of the issues that comes with that is standardization, isn't it? Isn't this?
Yeah, and standardization, education, showing people, somebody has to show the enterprises on how to do it in an effective manner, train the developers in order to do it right. It's the evolution. We first had client-server architectures, right? It took us so many years to get there. Now, from client-server to virtualized client-server kind of deployments, it took us a few years. And now this is going to take us from virtualized environments to a cloud-native application design. It's going to take us a few years.
Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask?
Can I take this opportunity to ask about how much support there's going to be for OmniPath and OpenStack? Is it going to support VMs, containers, layers?
So the question is about OmniPath, which is a next generation fabric technology that's coming from Intel. I don't know if we have a clear answer yet on how broad OmniPath is going to be deployed within enterprise data centers. Its first use case is in high-performance computing environments. So as it exists within those environments, if it makes sense to provide support, we will. And I think that that's something that you're going to have to watch over the next couple of years as the technology evolves and the use cases expand for that technology. And I wasn't expecting to get a question about OmniPath today. That was good. Keep me on my toes.
One of the things that is holding back OpenStack adoption in enterprise is the lack of skilled staff, and something that was alluded to by Jonathan today about the new certification administrators. Given that it took some time for Intel, with all the skilled resources at its disposal, to move into authentication for the legacy authentication into place, what's going to stop? How are enterprises going to move to this part of OpenStack, given this lack of skill, lack of resources out there? What can be done to help them?
So I think, Alex, this leads to you were talking to me about there are different kinds of organizations. I think it's an org culture kind of a discussion. You actually don't need large size organizations to be trained. You need a handful of organizations who are a handful of engineers, like not more than 10 engineers who are skilled to do systems administration, good sysadmins who have a good understanding of the compute, storage, and network architecture to go and make that change. And that's something which we learned because we did two-pronged approach in Intel IT. We trained our entire hosting organization with Puppet, with Python, a little bit of Python, but more Puppet, so that they could do configuration of, get them to be sysadmins. That changed their mindset a little bit, but they were still coming from the legacy mindset. But we did have at least 7 good systems engineers who had solid understanding of how you automate, DevOps kind of mentality. And when people say, oh, I'm DevOps, I think DevOps is a way of working. It is not like an organization, which one would call it. So that method of working, the way of working, is something which needs to be inculcated, and that's where a lot of efforts need to be put in the enterprises who want to move that side. Does it make sense?
Who drives that then? Where's that initiative going to come from? From the engineers themselves, the developers themselves, from the CIO?
CIOs. I think it's a CIO kind of a decision.
But I think that, if you see Intel's recent actions, I've alluded to it a number of times. Apparently, it's my favorite program of the day. Our Rackspace initiative, the OpenStack Innovation Center, developer training is a big part of that. And it's something that's recognized that organizations are looking for. So that's something that I think that you're going to see more and more from the community, offering peer sharing, development of talent to address the specific gap that you're talking about.
We're seeing the rise of these dojos, for example, in the Cloud Foundry world.
Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I really like that concept of dojos, which they just confine them to a particular area. They all have to be in San Francisco. And
I like the word, personally.
Dojo, right?
Dojo is a great word. Well, good. Well, so this is the time of the discussion where we get to talk about the future. And so if you're going to look into your crystal ball at OpenStack over the next 12 to 18 months, what would each of you say?
Okay, I have to think about it because I'm so ingrained right now to make the current things happen. But in my mind, a perfect world. So future is what
Perfect world is great.
Yeah, right. So what is going to be perfect in the next 3 years is when I have whatever changes I have made in terms of the community driving the blueprints which are fixing the enterprise gaps, and it drives the adoption of OpenStack. Let's say currently it is at 7% in the enterprise to 35%. That will be my wish, my desire to move the needle. And what needs to happen is, a group of enterprises. I'm actually meeting with some companies in Japan. We heard of all these NECs and NTTs. We're going to be meeting with them tomorrow, working. They've deployed significant large-scale deployments, done a lot of work, and if you saw the releases which they were on, the latest was, I think, Juno, but they haven't moved to Kilo, and I don't know whether they'll move to Liberty, and when. And they had 4 concurrent releases working in their environment. So how do those kind of challenges, I want to understand, and how do you remove those? So it's going to be there's a lot of opportunity for the community to connect together and work together. So
I had one that was very similar. I think that everybody saw in the keynote earlier today, they named NTT the user of the summit. Comcast handed over their baton. I think that over the next 18 months, I'm looking for that Academy Awards like user of OpenStack award to branch out into multiple categories, because there will be so many users to choose from. We're going to have to look for different examples of best practices to recognize.
Okay, great. Well, I was just curious on that last one because I was talking with someone from Cambridge last night about high-performance computing and how they see the marriage of high-performance computing and traditional IT.
Well, if you look at CERN, they've been doing high-performance computing
Right.
but so much of their stuff is homegrown on top of OpenStack. And again, that's like if I had a dream, I would make sure that kind of high-performance computing availability is to a wider audience rather than just the niche CERN.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, great. Are there any other last questions that people would like to ask?
So, to run enterprise applications like VMware, ERS has live migration, things like that. Does Intel have any plans to go invest in that, accelerate that, make it happen?
All the features with respect to live migration, we've actually started working on it, Alok, as you remember, a couple of cycles ago. And as part of this Cloud for All initiative, we actually are doubling down in partnering with Mirantis, with Rackspace, together so that these kind of gaps get plugged, because those are actually essentials for an enterprise to adopt OpenStack in a big way.
Well, thank you both for speaking with us today. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming to this Bento lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's show. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to thank the Intel Data Center Group. They're a leader in defining the open data center, cloud computing, and world of connected systems infrastructure. Its portfolio supports multiple processor families to offer options for workloads that reflect today's diverse user needs. You can find them at intel.com. That's the Intel Data Center Group. Audio editing and sound design for the new Stack Analysts podcast is provided by Broken Hours. You can find them at brokenhours.com. Thanks again, and hope to see you back at the show. Bye-bye.